Got everyone's attention? Thank you. We're ready to start the program. My name is Michael Cross, and Greg Dyer and I started this organization 5 years ago. For those of you who haven't been before, has basically three mandates. One of them is that we're trying to create a networking opportunity for people that are in the hedge fund, private equity, real estate, and also late-stage venture areas. Secondly, an educational piece. So we have a speaker tonight. It's Bryan Johnson, who you're going to, I think, enjoy hearing. And thirdly, we also raise money for charity. Tonight, we're raising money for Hedge Funds Care, which is a charity that exclusively raises money for child abuse only. A little bit of history on that is that 12 years ago, the hedge fund business was taking a beating in the press and the media, and a group decided to create an organization to raise money and improve the image, and discovered that there was, that as far as child abuse goes, there was not an organization that was an advocate for this group in particular. And interesting, the reason is because child abuse is usually something that is caused or forced upon children by family members and friends of family. So therefore, if your family members and your family is not supporting you, who's your advocate? So that's why we decided to do this and raised, I think we're over $20 million that we raised so far for it. And we raise money, and this is Hedge Fund Care Southeast, which raises money in Tennessee, Georgia, and the Carolinas. And there are chapters in Boston and New York and Chicago, San Francisco, LA, Miami, Dublin, London, and Hong Kong. So just a little bit of history on the group. So we meet 4 to 5 times a year here, and typically twice in Memphis. And if you're not on our list, be sure and get on it when you leave. I think we pretty much check everybody in well. And so that's pretty much the story there. I want to introduce our speaker, Bryan Johnson. I'm just going to paraphrase here. Was instrumental in Moody's Investor Service, which we all know from stocks and bonds and ratings, to be able to start using ratings for hedge funds. And prior to that, he was with the University of Texas System and helped with due diligence and other items. And so Bryan has his own company, and he's our speaker tonight, and so I'd like to welcome you. Thanks.
Working? Oh, good. Thank you very much. I think sometimes I feel like the hedge fund business or the alternative investment business is still taking a beat, every day, whether it's hedge funds or private equity, particularly, through the election. First of all, just again, thank you for inviting me here this evening. The last time I was in Nashville was last October. I was telling a few people. It really wasn't a pleasant experience because I came to see the Titans play the Steelers, and I'm a big Steelers fan. So I went home not feeling too well. But this trip, has been the opposite. Has been the antithesis of the last trip. So it's been a really good day. I've met some really good people, had some really good conversations. One thing I will try to remind myself at all times, I'm going to try to remind myself of it, through the talk this evening, is that I have 2 ears, 2 eyes, and 1 mouth. So I will endeavor to listen more, observe more, and talk less. So with that said, I want you to be able to feel free to ask as many questions, because obviously I want to address those questions and learn as much as I can from you, as well as try to deliver as much information, insight, and a little bit of intelligence from my side of the world. I started my firm about 3 years ago, after being about 20 years in the alternative investment business, having worked in a number of family offices, particularly through the alternative space. I had my own consultancy in the alternative space for 12 years. It was strictly focused on single-family offices, advised about 60 ultra-high net worth families, ran my own internal fund, and then deployed about $3 billion across private equity and hedge funds on behalf of those families. I started this firm because I saw through that whole process and through about 20 years in the business that a lot of smaller managers just were not having success in raising assets. And particularly in the hedge fund space, 89% of managers never get over 100 million. And that's a problem, because we certainly have to have some replacement of talent, number one. And number two, there's a lot of talent that are outside of the traditional linear kind of areas that investors generally look at. Nashville, Austin, other places that are outside of the New York, kind of tri-state area, where there's hedge fund or private equity or alternative investment heavy. So, we'll start the firm in order to bring a level of intelligence and efficiency to the fundraising process, get more managers over those hurdles. So, the topic tonight is, what does it really take to raise assets? And, having been to a lot of conferences over the years and having heard a lot of kind of, what in my opinion, bad information about telling managers about what it takes, I want to kind of give you some, my view of it, from my view of the room, and try to give you what I think is, a realistic picture of what it takes now. Raising assets, generally, right now is two ages. There's BC and there's an AD. And what I call BC is before the crisis, and AD is after death. And we went through this death experience of the crisis. And before the crisis, there was, basically a focus on return. People wanted as much alpha. They didn't really care about some of the more qualitative issues regarding, how funds were operating. Then we went through the crisis, and all kinds of things happened. Now people are more highly focused on things like headline risk, reputational risk, operational risk. So the more qualitative aspects are, have elevated to the top. And in fact, if you look at operational risk, which is probably, in the number one position now, as investors and allocators and intermediation points, look at managers, operational due diligence teams now have been elevated to the point where they have veto power. So with that being said, and I probably talk to maybe 300 or 400 managers a year, and every conversation starts the same. They start saying, well, tell me about what you're doing from a marketing standpoint, and they start telling me about their returns. And I said, well, no, tell me what you're doing from a marketing standpoint. Because we're not talking about return marketing, we're talking about marketing your fund, marketing your firm. And, generally, there's a lot of silence. And, because after we talk about returns, they really don't have much to talk about, because they haven't developed that skill set. They haven't developed that breadth of what it really takes. And in this environment, more so than, in BC, there's more of an emotional component to raising assets. And I think what captures the essence of that emotional component is a statement by Winston Churchill. And Churchill said, we sleep soundly at night with the knowledge that rough men are prepared to inflict violence on those that would do us harm. And for those of us who are in the alternative world, who are in the alpha generation business, we are rough people. And don't make any mistake about the level of violence that is out there that's being inflicted on wealth, whether it be individually or institutionally. Ask the people in Cyprus about how much violence is being inflicted on them. Ask people here, whether from a regulatory perspective, whether it's from, a legislative perspective, from, taxation, whether it's from the economic perspective, whether we get more, QE, all the derivative attacks on wealth. So we need rough people who can go out and fight those battles head on. And that's what you people are, in my opinion. If you're a true alpha generators, then you are rough people who are ready to inflict violence and protect your clients and your investors from the harm that's being done to them. So that's the emotional component that you have to convey. There are three general rules. I'm going to try to use this board some. I know it's a little low. But there are three general rules when you're trying to raise money in this environment. Anybody who doesn't kind of adhere to these three general rules is probably going to encounter some difficulty. First rule, and you all probably know these things intuitively, and I'm not saying probably anything that you haven't heard elsewhere, but maybe it's a general reminder, or maybe a not so general reminder in certain instances. First rule, people buy an emotion and support that decision with logic. Number one. Your job, if you are trying to raise money, everything you do gets boiled down to answering 8 emotional questions. Every metric, every quantitative metric, every qualitative metric that you send to an investor or an intermediation point is trying to answer 8 emotional questions. Because people, and you know this, they don't make decisions up here. Every decision gets made here first. It goes to here, and your visceral and your heart that override your head. Because it makes you think that, yeah, this makes sense to me. So you need to hit them here. What most managers do is they start here. This is my return, this is my return, this is my return, before getting here. So 8 questions. First rule, emotions drive mind. So, number 1, first question that you're going to have to answer, whether you realize it or not, is, and I'll put these 1A, am I going to keep what I already have? That's what the investor's going to, that's what he's thinking, or she's thinking. Am I going to keep what I already have? And I'm not only talking about money, because if you're talking to an intermediation point, first job of an intermediation point is to stay employed. So they're making career decisions based upon manager selection. So am I going to keep my job? Am I going to keep my career intact? Because basically the battlefield is kind of strewn with casualties of people who've made wrong decisions, and there have been career-ending decisions. So am I going to keep my reputation? Am I going to keep my money? Now, what's the answer to that? The answer generally is a quantitative answer. It's a quantitative answer. So that's when you go in, well, these are what my drawdowns have been. You know, you're not going to lose money with me. This is what our processes are. And again, process is the new performance. Start talking about your enterprise processes. So, 1, keeping what they have. B, am I going to get more? Everybody wants more, and that's why we're in the alternative investment business. We're alpha generators. We want more. That's when you start talking about your performance. This is how I'm going to get you more. This is how I'm going to keep you more. This is how I'm going to enhance your reputation. Because particularly if you're talking about smaller managers who are generally, you know, outside of the institutional world of marketing and fundraising. You know, and I've been in the single-family office, ultra-high net worth, you know, world for probably the bulk of my career, 20 plus years. And I can tell you unequivocally from my experience that a wealthy family, their reputation, the currency of their reputation, in large measure will exceed their net worth. It's almost, you can't put a price on that. So understanding that, there's no excess return that you can give me that's going to compensate me if you blow up and I got headline risk, and you're a bad manager, you're a fraudulent manager, something goes wrong. So you got to make sure that now you're going to say, I'm going to give you more. Not only from a return perspective, but I'm going to enhance your situation holistically. So, getting more. See. 2 things that everybody wants to feel. They want to feel smart. They want to look intelligent. They want to make sure that I'm investing with you. I feel that was a damn good decision that I made to give him money. And they're going to look back after you put out these great returns and say, you know what, I was right. I was right. I feel intelligent. So they're going to look smart by investing early with an early stage manager, one that they've kind of done some rigorous due diligence on. They're going to feel intelligent. You want to look smart, feel intelligent. And how you also do that is how you edify what their knowledge base is. You know, you're not investing in a vacuum. You're part of their portfolio. And they're going to be a part of their asset allocation. And they're going to be applying what you're telling them to other parts. You know, you're not investing in a silo. That also goes for intermediation points. How are you edifying what they're doing? And I can tell you, consultants are resource constrained. Fee compression is across the board. Talent is expensive. So they're looking for any way that they can get an edge. And that could be from you, not only just from an alpha generation, but from informational, a knowledge-based edge. Because they're resource constrained. So if you can augment their knowledge base, that's going to be an additional point of competitive differentiation for you. So they need to feel smart, look intelligent. So smart, intelligent. Next thing, safety. Safety. I already said it's a violent world. People want to feel safe. Are you going to be safe? Are they going to be safe with you? How do you just demonstrate that? Your enterprise processes, your execution blueprint, external execution blueprint. I had a conversation earlier with somebody about service providers, service partners, and how they enhance your overall profile. That gives a measure of safety. Because, I mean, let's face it, everybody has a success bucket. Every investor has a success bucket. We always talk about bucketing and asset, you know, from an asset perspective. Let's talk about bucket from a success perspective. Because they can start to put you in that success bucket from prior investments that they've made that have turned out well, managers that they've affiliated with that say, well, this person reminds me of X when we invested with them. You're in the success bucket. Which brings me to a point, one of the most crucial points you can do from a fundraising perspective, profiling. How much intelligence have you gathered about your end user investor as well as the intermediation point? Before you sit down with them, what's been their history of investing? Particularly from an alternative perspective. Have they invested in strategies like yours before? Have they invested in early stage managers before? What's been their proclivity to invest in early stage managers? Are they just kicking tires? Is that what they normally do? You know, what's their asset allocation look like? Who are the intermediation points around them? If you look at ultra high net worth individuals, single family offices on average, they have anywhere from 12 to 14 intermediation points around them. And then now the next job is to identify the strategic one. The one that you have to convert optimally to be an ally for your fund. Because every day you can open up the paper and there's somebody saying, well, hedge funds don't provide any value. They're just fee generation for the manager. And if you talk about fund of funds, it's even a worse kind of topic. So that's what you have to do. You have to convert those strategic intermediation points to be allies. In the worst case scenario, let them be benign. Don't turn them into the enemy. And depending upon what that intermediation point is, if it's a wirehouse, internal wirehouse team, and you're asking for a $5 million allocation from one of their clients, what's their initial thought? That's $5 million and I'm not getting any fees from it. It's going away from you. So it may be the greatest thing for that investor. Your fund may be positioned well. But that internal team is looking at $5 million in assets going away from them. So, it's in their best interest to say, maybe you ought to think twice about that. And let us look for something that's more similar that maybe on our platform, that has a bit more process and controls around it. Some story that they're going to bring to the table that kind of blows your fund out of the water. So that's why you need to understand the intermediation activity around every prospect that you have. And that's why profiling is so critically important. One of the biggest ways that small funds, young funds waste time is they're not really efficient in fundraising perspective, meaning they don't profile. They just go from one investor to the other. They don't know anything about them. All they know is they got some money. And they may have responded positively to something that you sent them, or they may be just, from a courtesy perspective, you know somebody they know, you contacted them, they said, well, look, I'll be willing to sit down and listen to what you have to say. So, safety. Simplicity. I don't think that there's any word that I can use that will, or any words, set of phrases that I can use that could convey the level of complexity that the ultra high net worth family has in their life. The last thing that they need is to take on another headache. If you're not making the job easy for them, there is another fund that is going to make the job easy for them. And I mean easy from an investing standpoint, easy from just an interaction standpoint. Simplicity. We are now in the age of simplicity, which is when people talk about transparency. I really want to talk about simple structures, plain language, things like that. One of the reasons why, you get a lot of families now, a lot of even institutional investors who are now looking at, alternative data. Because it's, in their mind it's cheaper, it's liquid, and there's more transparency. Personally, I think that's kind of an oxymoronic phrase, but that's just my whole personal opinion. But those kind of questions come up when the marketing of your fund isn't done well. And we have the reputational issues that we spoke of earlier. The people are looking for cheaper, more transparent, highly liquid, alternatives. I guarantee if I sat down with each one of you and you trotted out your best investor, they would probably not have, and I said, well, how do you feel about fees? Have you complained about them? If you've been delivering great performance holistically, not just from an investment perspective, just not from a return perspective, from your investor relations, how you interact with them, most people don't have a problem, paying those fees if they are getting holistic performance. But if they're not, first thing they're going to do is bang the table about fees. First thing they're going to do. So, simplicity. Make sure that your delivery comes across as simple. There are five C's to your delivery, to your overall message. It has to be clear, it has to be concise, it has to be consistent, it has to be compelling, it has to be regulatory compliant. If you follow those 5 C's in your message to investors, you're going to be far and away above any of your competition. And the compliance part is really, really critical now going forward. Really, really critical. I mean, the SEC is like all over everything from a compliance standpoint, particularly from a marketing standpoint. Now they're looking at how funds are being distributed. You have the whole Jobs Act thing coming up. If that lowers or eliminates the barriers of solicitation, then we're talking about a whole nother world, which increases the level of competition for managers, particularly early stage managers. But again, simplicity. That's on your side. That's something you can control. Strength. Simplicity first. Clear, consistent, concise, regulatory compliant, and compelling. Did I say that? Strength. Are you strong enough to manage my money? That goes back to your execution blueprint. Are you strong enough? What are your service providers like? Do you have the strength internally as well as externally? Do you have a robust operational environment? I mean, anybody who's been successful enough to create some substantial wealth didn't do that by being stupid. And they have an enormous amount of responsibility. An enormous amount of responsibility. Generational. You know, if you look at how, wealth and wealth transference, the Chinese have a saying, in shirt sleeve to shirt sleeves, 3 generations. And, a lot of patriarchs and matriarchs know that. A lot of times, that entrepreneurial zeal and that ability to create wealth and build that visionary, that they are, sometimes it skips a generation. Sometimes it may not come back at all. So they're investing for perpetuity purposes. So strength is critically important. Most of the single-family offices that I've worked with, they like legacy investments. And you want to be a legacy fund for them, meaning that you may start out with a patriarch and matriarch now, and years later, if you decide to still stay in this business, you've got grandkids and all those other people who are now part of your fund. You've grown with them. From a marketing standpoint, I always like to tell funds that you want chunky and sticky money. It's better to have $25 million allocations than $100 million allocations. Just from an economic perspective, running your fund, it makes it a lot easier, a lot cheaper, a lot more expensive. You can have deeper and more long-lasting relationships with 20 than you can with 100. And it takes that, that expense burden from operating your fund away. So, a lot of people think, these new structures that have come up from, being able to take in assets, they get excited about them, but they have derivative issues. If you're going to have, lots of investors, what's going to be your investor relations function? How much is that going to cost you? And I'll talk about, that, in a minute or so. So strength. So, again, first rule, don't violate the first rule, which is don't believe that people don't buy on emotion when they support that decision with logic. Rule number 2, people buy from people they know, people they trust, and people who are highly competent. If they don't know you, that means if they haven't had qualitative and quantitative interaction with you, it's not a one and done type of deal. They don't have qualitative and quantitative interaction with you, then they don't know you. Particularly if you're talking about ultra high net worth, single family offices, multifamily offices. So people they know, people they trust, people they feel are highly competent. And the third rule, and this is, don't violate this one either. They buy when that entire process is executed flawlessly. If you don't have a written, documented marketing process that has a flow chart through all the different steps and stages of marketing and fundraising, you're probably operating on an ad hoc basis, means there's little structure and consistency and continuity to your effort and in engaging with investors. That means you can't really do it in a replicable fashion. You're not going to be able to execute at a high level. You're not going to be able to execute flawlessly. So, when small funds come to me and they say, well, we're having problems, I'll say, well, what's your process? And they tell, well, Again, right back to talking about the returns. This is what your marketing process. Let me go back to the census. That's where you need to start. And ideally, you need to start that. If you're in a startup phase, you need to start having those deep discussions before you launch. Now, that would be an ideal situation, but if you're not having that, then somewhere shortly after that, you need to start having those discussions about, okay, what do we need to do, identifying the appropriate segments for us, identifying the different intermediation points within those segments, and how do we start building, relationships within and using the appropriate metrics. One of the metrics that I've developed for my firm, and we did use this to help managers really get a fundamental understanding of what they need to be doing, is what I call MVAR, which is your marketing VAR. And VAR means your visibility, awareness, and relationships from a marketing perspective. Visibility is what your outreach is, what has it been. Awareness is if I went to somebody who's in your network or in your pipeline, and I said, well, tell me about, John's fund. And they give me a blank, you don't have a lot of awareness, you got a little school. Relationships are, again, going back to that qualitative and quantitative face-to-face. It's not, well, I sent them my performance numbers and I haven't heard back. You don't have a relationship, you have nothing at that point. So we have a lot of incremental, measurements in each of those phases. We roll that up to one number and we tell that manager, this is your MVAR. This is what you can expect or not expect from a fundraising perspective over this particular time. So, rule one, know going in, people buy an emotion, they support that decision with logic. Rule number two, they buy from people they know, people they trust, people who are highly competent. And rule number three, they buy when that marketer or that firm or that fund executes that entire process flawlessly. Okay. Three aspects, critical aspects for raising cash. I'm a firm believer in this, like the nuts and bolts and the blocking and tackling of the marketing and fundraising process. There's a strategic component, which we just kind of went over. There's a tactical component, and there's a financial component. The tactical component is, again, identifying the appropriate segments on a quantitative basis, making sure that, hey, we got 500 people within our, sweet spot. We're going to triage this group. We're going to hit this first 100. We're going to hit the second 100. How are we going to do that? Because one of the things, too, that you need to really be mindful of is that there's a lot of idiosyncratic behavior on the investor side of the equation, which is exacerbated by the degree of intermediation that's involved. If you go to every consultant, and there's been some consolidation in the consultant world, go to every consultant, there are about 200. They will take probably one of the 4 or 5 kind of global standards, that they maybe use, whether it's, PWG or AIMA or somebody, then they will overlay or in addition add on their own proprietary standard. It's a way of, justifying their existence and adding some value to that client, which increases the idiosyncratic behavior from a manager selection standpoint. So again, going back to profiling, do you know what that particular intermediation point does in evaluating managers? Whether you're working with a third-party marketer or a placement agent, a good third-party marketer or a placement agent will get you over that curve very, very quickly. Because they know, they've got their ear to the ground. This is what they're doing on a regular basis. They know, what the hot buttons are, what their, particular, types of proclivities are, pattern recognition, what they've, invested in the past, the way they go about the allocation process. So if you're working with a third-party marketer or a placement agent, that's part of, part and parcel of what separates the good ones, from the not so good ones. So you want to, keep that, up and uppermost in your mind. So again, tactically, and then, do you have the resources, the skill set internally if you're not working with an external provider, like a third-party market or placement agent, do you have the resources and the time to really go after the marketing effort? You know, you may be trading all day. It's like, when am I going to have time to really kind of do all this other stuff? Because, I mean, make no mistake about it, that the marketing effort requires as much discipline and focus as you do on trading each day. And if you don't make an equal commitment to the marketing function, you're not going to raise, assets. You're not going to raise money. One of the things I tell managers early on after I sat down with them, I said, if you trade the way you market, you're not going to be in business long. Because they do it haphazardly. And even when you put them on the right path, there's a high degree of recidivism in the marketing function. People get on the right path, they start doing things, okay, then they kind of think, I can just set it and forget it. It doesn't work that way. From a communication standpoint, I think one of the things you do to increase your awareness number and your relationship number from an outreach is that you need to be, engaged with your target prospects, ideally weekly, monthly, quarterly, and opportunistically. Opportunistically is even probably more important, particularly after you sat down with them. You know a little bit about, what their whole picture looks like. So your job now is to start to get more mind share with them as to how your fund will fit into their whole, worldview, how it's going to help them. So I'm going to just talk lastly here about the financial, aspects of raising money, which is really rarely ever discussed in detail. We did a study last year, which was the results of which were confirmed in a certain level by a study that Citi's Prime Brokers Consulting Group came out with. We did a study, and what we did was we found that on an ultra high net worth perspective, it takes 75 bips per million. 25 bips per million to raise money. 25 on the acquisition, 15 on the client service. In an institutional perspective, it takes 75 bips per million, which breaks down to basically about 45 on the acquisition side and 25 bips on the client service. Citi came out with a study, and if any of you want a copy of the study, you can just email me. I'd be happy to send you Citi's version of the study. The average manager with 124 million AUM spent 198 bips on marketing, exclusive of compensating the marketing people, even if it was internal. So marketing is not cheap, particularly for emerging managers. So if you're going into it, you've got a small fund, you have to say, well, how much are we going to have to set aside or allocate for our marketing function? Because as probably most of you know, it's not as simple as posting returns on hedgefund.net and wait for the money to tumble in. So making sure that you're adequately financed from a marketing perspective. And that can grow significantly if you decide to go off the kind of these other alternatives that may be coming up as a result of the Jobs Act. I think, I probably get 10 calls a week from people now who are excited about the Jobs Act and their small managers. And my initial question is why? Why are you excited about the Jobs Act? The Jobs Act wasn't, from an alternative marketing perspective, it wasn't created for small managers. It wasn't created for you. It was created so the largest alternative managers, the KKRs, the Blackstones, the BlackRocks, could go downstream and get more retail dollars. And if you can tell me as a small manager you have a marketing budget that outspends them, then you're a single family office and you should be investing. Because if you got that much money, you're doing something else. So, I kind of temper the enthusiasm, people who are getting small managers who are getting overly excited about the Jobs Act legislation. You know, I'm trying to think of just a few more, you know, things around the financial aspect, you know, of, you know, raising, you know, assets. You know, the runway, you know, whoa, one of the other things too, marketing in your geographic footprint. That is critically important. And most funds don't do it. You know, I get, you know, funds from all over the country and they're busy running back and forth to New York. Well, there's a couple fund of funds that are interested in us and like, why are you going to New York? You know, one of the things that, you know, we do for clients, if you go to the website, you can download some actual, you know, stuff that we talk with clients, is that we do what is called a cluster and density analysis. And we do an intermediation overlay on top of that. So what that is we look at, you know, ultra high net worth, you know, density in their geographic footprint, which is generally 3 to 4 hours drive from where they are. And then we do an intermediation overlay, whether it be trust and estate attorneys and other, you know, providers to them. And people are always shocked at how dense the opportunities are for them. You know, if you look at here, just in Tennessee, just from our, you know, database alone and what we look at, there are about close to 800 individuals and families with a minimum net worth of 50 million. And how many of them do you have awareness with? If you do an intermediation overlay on top of that, we're talking close to around 1,500 opportunities. How many of that 1,500, you know, can you say confidently know about, you know, my firm and what I'm doing? So instead of going back, you know, $3,000 or $4,000 cop trips to New York, you know, it's better just to market in your own geographic footprint. And also there are lifestyle implications for that too. You know, if you've got, you know, wives, husbands, children, not wives and husbands, but a wife and a husband and some children. You know, you say, look, I'm going to drive over somewhere this morning. It's a 3 or 4 hour drive. I'm going to have a 2-hour meeting. I'll drive back. I'll be home tonight. Or I'm going to take a quick flight back and forth. You know, like if for me, you know, if this was a lunchtime deal, I took a 6:25 flight from Austin. I got here at 8:15. I could have came right, done a lunchtime deal, and caught an evening flight back. And you can do the same thing. As opposed to if I go to New York, which I'm going to in a couple of weeks, there's no way I'm doing that. I mean, and there's no way I'm staying cheap either. It's not like I'm going there and staying in a Motel 6. You know, that's an easy, you know, just for me alone, if I take an assistant with me, that's an easy $4,000 trip. So how many $4,000 dry holes can you afford to drill when you're marketing fundraising? Not many. So there are certainly things that, you know, we, you know, kind of recommend that funds do, you know, to use those kind of resources, those limited resources more effectively, more efficiently, more wisely as they kind of go out, you know, marketing and fundraising. So, you know, that's kind of, like I said, I know I probably went over and I probably talked more than I should have, but I really want to kind of be available to answer your questions. So if there are questions that you have, please just kind of lob them up and let's get to it.
Hey, Bryan, one thing that I'll ask is, you know, there's a lot of things you can purchase to try to help your marketing. And I think of like conferences you can attend or databases, and those aren't cheap either. What's your view on that, using something like that as a way to widen your, you know, your rule number 2 or whatever?
You know, we develop a conference strategy for clients, and there's a rule of thumb. This is what I tell clients right off the bat from conferences. Don't go to a conference, I don't care where it is, even if it's across town, if you can't have 3 to 5 individual face-to-faces. And I'm not talking about, you know, 5 minutes. If you can't get 3 to 5, you know, individual face-to-face meetings, don't go. There are better ways for you to spend your time. From a database perspective, you know, there's also a rule of thumb. The cheaper the database, the more probably inept it is. Because any database that's cheap has probably been inappropriately over-prospected. So if you're looking for probably from an institutional perspective, I would say that, recommendation, the MMD Access database is probably, I would think, one we use to supplement our efforts. And from a private wealth perspective, the WealthX database, which just recently came out about a year or two ago, we use that. Neither one of them is cheap. I think the WealthX is about $10K. And if you get all the bells and whistles from the MMD Access, it can run about $15,000. But again, it's worth it if you're really going to be committed to marketing. I mean, you have to make a commitment, and which is the last thing. There's a mnemonic rule. If you take nothing away from what I said, remember this mnemonic rule. You all learned it when you were kids. And when I was a kid, it's I before E, but in this case, only after C. So I'm going to write this down. And remember, if you remember nothing else about marketing, remember this rule. I before E, but only after C. Accurate information, objective insight, acute intelligence, and understand intermediation. Those are the I's. The E's: energy, emotion. It takes a lot of energy raising money for a small fund. It takes a lot of energy raising money for any fund, to tell you the truth. Be prepared to deliver lots of education and make sure that you are executing flawlessly at that high level. Those are the E's. C's: commitment. Start with commitment. It's like, I'm sure somebody here plays golf. If you don't commit to your swing, then what happens? You have to make a commitment to marketing. It cannot be something that is like an afterthought or haphazard. If that's the case, you're going to do it inconsistently, and it's going to be an ad hoc behavior. You're not going to make the requisite investment in the right resources and skills in order to be successful. So it starts with commitment. Control the process, meaning you have to take full ownership of it. It's not the cap intros team at your prime broker. It's not the third-party marketer. It's not the placement agent's job, even though you may have hired those people. It all starts internally. You have to take control, ownership of that marketing function. Conviction is a derivative of commitment. You have to have marketing conviction, which means that uncategorically that what you're doing each day, each week, each month, each quarter from a marketing perspective is spot on. Compliant, regulatory compliant marketing. That's a no-brainer. And finally, the final C, you got to care about what you're doing. You got to care about what you're doing internally, and you have to convey that level of care to the intermediation points and the end user. And how you do that is really going in detail, explaining how thoughtful you are about your entire enterprise process, what your execution blueprint is like. I'm giving a lot, because 9 times out of 10, you got a lot of your own net worth wrapped up in your fund. So if you don't care about how you're managing your money and there are process controls and all those things in place, then if you don't care about how you deal with your own money, you're certainly not going to care about how you deal with mine. And in this, the atmosphere that we're in now, this elevated litigation risk, particularly around hedge funds. If you look at what's happening with SAC and all these use of expert networks and all that kind of stuff. Operational soundness is mandatory. Operational excellence is a point of competitive differentiation that protects you as well as protects your investors. So even if it's from a selfish perspective, protect yourself. Did you care about yourself? You care about what you're doing. So again, I's for E's, but only after the C's. So I'm sorry about that.
be hanging around, and I'm sure you can ask questions of them, at length. A couple of things. Those of you who are new, there's no membership fee or anything for this organization. We do raise money for charity, as I mentioned, but also we have sponsors that pay for the appetizers and the bar, and they're annual sponsors, and also sometimes we have event sponsors. So our strategic partner in this organization is the Cosmos CPAs. I don't believe anyone from their firm is here today. And our sustaining members are both Convergys Prime Brokerage, which I don't see either, and Partnership Financial Consulting. Keith, you want to be recognized there? So they make this, they pay for and I joke when I say this, but the free food and the free booze. But one thing else that we do, as soon as we finish this next step, we'll reopen the bar, reopen the food, the network, and what I'm going to do now is ask everybody to, when you're called upon, to give your name and your company, and maybe if you want to, a sentence or two about what you do. And Angie, you want to get us started?
How did I know that?
Because you're closest.